Hello, dear friends. Today, my distinguished guest is Rabbi Dr. David Fox Sandmel. Rabbi Sandmel is the president of the International Council of Christians and Jews. This is our second interview with the rabbi. The link to the first interview will be in the first comment under the video. After the first one, we had a lot of comments and questions. That is why we decided to meet again. Rabbi Sandmel, thank you for finding the time for the interview and readiness to share your thoughts and wisdom.
My pleasure.
Dear Rabbi David, please allow me to offer my heartfelt congratulations on the birth of your first grandchild. Mazal tov to the family.
Thank you.
May he grow up healthy and happy to the delight of you and all of your loved ones. Please,
Amen.
amen. Uh, please allow me to ask some personal questions. How is the baby? What is it like for you to become a grandfather?
Well, the baby is amazing, of course. Um, uh, and the parents are also amazing. Everybody seems to be doing well. We got to spend the first several weeks of the baby's life out there with them, helping out, spending time. So it's just amazing. And it's really nice in the midst of all of the horrible things that are going on in the world to have something joyful to be part of. So all around, it was a good thing.
I'm glad to hear that. That's amazing. Um, I know that in Judaism, a person's name is more than just a name. So let me ask you one more personal question. How is the baby's name chosen?
The baby's name, which is Shai Gavriel, um, was chosen. The Shai is in memory of actually two people. One is my mother-in-law, that would be the baby's great grandmother, whose Yiddish name was Shana, but everyone called her Shanky, and so Shai comes from that. And then um, uh, also named after a very close friend of the parents, a man named Sean, who unfortunately died much too young within the last year or so. So named after him. And then Gavriel is named after my daughter-in-law's grandmother, who was apparently a very strong, as in, Gibor, a very strong person and a very important influence in the family. So those that's where the names come from.
Interesting. I know we in our family we a lot of our um names my name was Jewish. There is a custom of doing a civic name, and then a Jewish name. Parents decided that my first name was just going to be Jewish, so it's Daniel, and my sister had both. Um, as far as I know, a name is given for a Jewish boy at circumcision, as it is written, "Every male among you shall be circumcised when he is 8 days old," which is written in Bereshit or Genesis. Um, what does Brit Milah, circumcision, symbolize in the Jewish tradition?
Well, uh, it is. As you mentioned, it's an explicit commandment given on a with a specific timeline. So even if the eighth day after the birth is Shabbat or Yom Tov or even Yom Kippur, you still do the bris on that day, and it has it has acquired over the generations, I think, sort of extra layers of significance in terms of being a physical sign of the covenant which is really where it initially comes from in Genesis. It's a sign of the covenant between God and Abraham, and then for the successive generations after that. And indeed, there's a line in the Birkat Hamazon, which probably comes from somewhere else, about um, uh, uh, having a sign sealed in the flesh. So on all of those levels, it has acquired a very specific resonance, I think, as sort of a quintessential Jewish ritual for boys. Yeah.
As you already know, from the first interview, in each of my interviews, I tell a Jewish joke. So here it goes. Announcement in a Jewish newspaper. Morris and Shayla Goldblatt are proud to announce the birth of their son, Dr. Daniel Goldblatt. What is your dream? What do you want your grandson to become when he'll grow up? What kind of the world would you like him to live in?
Well, those are two very different questions in many ways. Ideally, I'd like him to live in a world in which there is peace and in which there is plenty, so that everybody has what they need. Um, you know, one of my favorite verses is that everyone should sit under their vine and under their fig tree with nothing to make them afraid. That for me is a very powerful image, and that's what I'd like. And in terms of what I'd like him to be is uh, a mensch. Um, however he ends up finding fulfillment in life, more power to him. But just um, keep in mind that uh, there are uh, values and morals and ways of treating other people that I think are the foundation. And of course, if everybody did that, then we'd have a world in which everybody sat under their vine and their fig tree and they weren't afraid. So that's my vision.
Those are great wishes, and I think in general to the world. Um, and that is very similar to the Garden of Eden as it was described, if I'm not mistaken, that
Yes.
it was as it was described in Genesis. Um, Jews have a covenant received at Sinai, and Christians have their own received through Jesus. We live on earth among representatives of different religions, each with their own relationships, their own dialogue with gods. I hope that is not a very complicated question, but how many covenants with gods, do you think there are overall in the world?
I have no idea. Um, uh, and to some extent, I'm not really concerned about that question. Um, I tend to think more about um, how people behave, and if someone has a tradition or a philosophy or a teaching, um, wherever they think that it may have originated, whether they believe it came from a supreme being or beings or whatever. Um, um, Again, for me, what really matters is how people treat one another. And uh, uh, if what they have leads them to be good people, then that's fine with me. And I'm not here to judge. And I thought about this question a little bit, and I thought about the fact that um, there is the idea in Pirkei Avot, who is wise, the person who learns from everyone, right? And we have a bracha, a blessing that one is supposed to say when one sees a scholar, regardless of where that what tradition that person comes from. Um, so um, uh, so we recognize that there is value and benefit and potential for righteousness in everyone. Again, the concept of Hasidei Umot Ha'olam, the righteous of the nations of the world. So again, um, uh, I'm most interested in what directs people's behavior and how again how they interact.
So, would you say that it is more, I guess, important that people, it doesn't, for the sake of world peace and for the sake of uh, world dialogue, I guess, is more important that people are just good people and that they can and are ready to learn from one another rather than the religion they believe in or something that they believe in.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that look, we know that differences in religion have often led to violence and hatred and so forth. Um, I think that those of us involved in interreligious dialogue believe that religious differences can actually lead to appreciation, understanding, insight, um, and that we can harness that to be a force, again, a force for peace in the world. And it's uh, uh, that's kind of why I do what I do, I guess, is that uh, I believe that whether religious differences or traditions or philosophical differences um, can be enriching and rewarding and lead us to better places. Um,
Definitely. I had a following up on that quote statement. I had a dialogue recently with the person who is also involved in interfaith dialogue, and I have a question. How can one conduct interfaith dialogue, or how to ask the questions in interfaith dialogue to learn more, but also not to offend people or not to overstep in questions, but also to learn and take new information from one another and learn from one another.
well, I think some of it is an attitude of openness and an attitude also of humility. Um, um, we don't always know how to frame a question to someone else in a way that's going to fit and sort of feel natural to them. So I think approaching with a certain caution, I'm uh, help me understand where this fits into you. I think clearly um, not sort of imposing whatever the standards or from one's own uh, background. You don't look for yourself in the other person, but you let them be themselves and explain themselves and put forward how they see the world. And so it's um, uh, and I think. understanding, trying to understand people as they understand themselves. So through not, not again, not imposing our structures or whatever on them.
Thank you so much. Uh, I want to also discuss a topic we started in our previous interview. We discussed the Declaration of Nostra Aetate, issued 60 years ago at the Second Vatican Council. Its fourth chapter is about Jews and devoted to Jews and Judaism. The document
Mhm.
speaks about the spiritual bond and heritage between Jews and Christians and acknowledges the church's roots lie on in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and the Jewish people. It rejects the accusations that the Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus and the concepts and contempt of Jews and Judaism. In the year 2000, the New York Times publishes Dabru Emet, a Jewish statement on Christians and Christianity. It is signed by over 170 rabbis and Jewish scholars from all around the world and across all Jewish denominations. The text of this document is very easy to find on the internet if someone is interested. Um, what is, or can it be considered as a sort of response to the Nostra Aetate Declaration?
Um, in part, but it's broader than that. It's important to keep in mind that uh, Nostra Aetate gets a great deal of attention, but it was not the first, nor was it the only statement or position taken by Christian leaders and Christian denominations after the Second World War. There are various bishops' conferences who made statements before the Vatican did. There are various Protestant churches who did so as well. Um, but both because of the comparative size of the Roman Catholic Church and also the media attention that was focused on the Second Vatican Council and on this particular document, um, it has come to represent in many ways the um, sort of post-Shoah Christian reassessment of its relationship to Jews and Judaism. Um, Dabru Emet um, uh, talks broadly about Christianity, does not mention Catholic Church or other churches explicitly, and it talks about the changes in the Christian world. Nostra Aetate certainly represents that, but it is not the only example of that. Um, it's so it certainly is a response to Nostra Aetate, but it goes beyond Nostra Aetate.
Do you think that Dabru Emet can be considered as a statement from the Jewish people in general?
Dabru Emet is very clear that it represents the opinion of the people who wrote it and those who endorsed it. All of the people who endorsed it were individuals. It was not, it doesn't represent any institutional authority. And in fact, it's worth pointing out that the four main authors of Dabru Emet um, were all academics. They were not people working for the Jewish community per se. So there is um, uh, Michael Signer, blessed memory. Rabbi Michael Signer was a professor at Notre Dame University. Peter Oakes is at the University of Virginia. David Novak's the University of Toronto. And Tikva Freimer-Kensky. Um, um, well, she taught at the Reconstructionist School. I think she taught at Penn. I think she taught at the University of Chicago. But these were people who are in academic settings where, in fact, uh, they have colleagues, and this is part of what they talked about as their motivation is many of them had Christian colleagues with whom they were in conversation and who influenced their thinking and so forth. So that's a significant thing to keep in mind is that the authority, to the extent that Dabru Emet has any authority, comes from the reputation of the authors and the people who endorsed it. Um, uh, uh, Dabru Emet emerged um, out of a project at what was then called the Institute for Christian and Jewish Studies in Baltimore. It has since changed its name to the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies. But at that point, it was focused specifically on Jewish Christian. Um, the Institute sponsored two groups. There was a Christian scholars group on Jews and Judaism and a Jewish scholars group on Christians and Christianity. And um, uh, in the Jewish, one of the things that Jewish scholars and people involved in dialogue were hearing from people in the Christian world is when is the Jewish community going to respond to documents like Dabru Emet and so forth? And so that was sort of the impetus, and some of those who were involved in the Jewish Scholars Group decided that yes, it was time to write such a document, um, and uh, the Institute took it on, decided to support it. I came on board there not as one of the authors, but as the manager of the project. So I got to work very closely with the four authors. Um, I even suggested the name Dabru Emet. The text was already there, but they needed a title, and since it came out of the ICJS in Baltimore, everyone was concerned it would be called the Baltimore Statement, and no one liked that. So I made that suggestion, and it was accepted. Um, and the document went through a number of drafts and so forth as the authors argued over some of the fine points. I got to be present for some of those arguments, and um, they were at times quite heated arguments over um, as you can imagine, given some of the topics over theology, over history, over politics, you know. Um, uh, but eventually, the text was agreed upon, and um, I think it's also important I was talking a little bit about the nature of authority of the document, but the authors really looked at this as the beginning of a conversation. Um, Michael Signer used to say, Dabru Emet has 8 paragraphs, each of which begins with a bolded statement. Jews and Christians worship the same God, I think is the first one. I should pull it up and have it in front of me, but that's the first one. Michael said, a different way to read this is not to read them as a statement with a period at an end, but turn them into questions and then dig into the questions. Do Jews and Christians worship the same God? What does that mean? In what ways, and so forth. So, and it was because of that when the document was published, we also published 2 books along with it. One was a a volume of essays, more of an academic volume called Christianity in Jewish Terms, and the other was aimed more at lay people, at congregational learning, college students, perhaps even advanced high school students, called Irreconcilable Differences, question mark, a learning resource for Christians and Jews. So, um, as opposed to, say, a document of the Roman Catholic Church, which um, comes with authority and um, you know, sort of um, is considered to be determinative and definitional. Dabru Emet was much more, here's what we've seen, here are some ways to think about it, but where do we go from here? So,
Interesting. So would you say that Dabru Emet was the first document in around 2000 years to declare the attitude of Jews who signed it towards Christians and Christianity? Or is it just a new kind of statement and document based on the previous history of Jews and Christians?
well, look, certainly, if you look at the broad sweep of Jewish literature in the last 2,000 years, you're going to find statements about Christians and Christianity, um, many of which are polemical and critical. Um, but for example, Maimonides talks about the fact that both Christianity and Islam serve a purpose in Maimonides' Jewish understanding of the world in spreading knowledge of God and Torah beyond the Jewish people, right? Um, um, and the Meiri, very importantly, talked about the fact that um, Christian and in this he was rejecting other Jewish scholars that Christianity was not idolatry. So there were some Jewish writers who felt that belief in Jesus, especially the use of icons and figurative representations that were found, especially in medieval churches and so forth, that was a form of idolatry. But they said no. When Christians invoke the name of Jesus, they are referring to God, which I think Christians would agree as well. We could get into discussions about the nature of the Trinity, but you see this. And then as we move into especially as we move into the late 19th and then into the 20th century, especially, you begin to see um, uh, uh, Jews, excuse me, you begin to see Jews writing about Christianity. Scholars like Joseph Klausner Klausner is very interesting. He was a student of Ahad Ha'am, but also a devotee of Zeb Jabotinsky. Um, and he was the first university-trained Jew to write a full-length book about Jesus in Hebrew, which was quite revolutionary, even if the book itself was, excuse me, it could be critiqued, let us say. Um, when you get, so there is this trend toward a more open approach to Christianity. Um, and after, after the Second World War, and especially after Nostra Aetate and other changes, you begin to see some movement in this direction. So in 1973, I believe, the French rabbinate drafted a document, a statement on a Jewish statement on Christians and Christianity, but they ended up not being able to agree on it, and it was put in a file cabinet and not published until after Dabru Emet came out, when someone brought it out and it was published as an article in the Revue des Études Juives. My father, who I think we discussed in our first interview, if I recall correctly, wrote a book called "We Jews and You Christians," and this I don't remember the publication date, late 60s, early 70s. Um, and in that, there was a proposed statement of the synagogue to the church. And in fact, I was aware of this and made photocopies of it and took it to one of the editorial meetings with the people who were writing Dabru Emet and circulated it. And none of them had seen it before. Even Michael Signer, who was my father's student, had not seen it before. And there was a lot of overlap there. Um, but you know, um, it's one thing for an individual to put something like this out, but it's quite different when you get the sort of broad-based support that something like Dabru Emet represents. And then, of course, in subsequent years, there have been several other statements that have been put out. Um, uh, 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 there's To do the will of our Father in heaven, which came from an ad hoc group of leaders connected with the Orthodox world. Then there was between I always forget if it's Jerusalem and Rome or Rome and Jerusalem. One of those comes first, which was endorsed by the Rabbinical Council of America, the Chief Rabbinate of Israel, and the European Council of Rabbis. That came with some institutional authority. Um, and I think it's noteworthy to see how, especially in the Orthodox world, there has been a significant opening up to the idea of dialogue with Christians, certainly, but also with Muslims. Um, there were a number of things that were holding that back. One is that I think the sort of natural tendency among lower C conservative religious people, not to rush in to things. I think that was a part of it. There was also, um, especially for the American Orthodox rabbinate, concerns expressed by Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik in his article Confrontation, in which he was very leery of interreligious relations, especially discussions that might uh, get involved with matters of belief or theology. Um, he was certainly open to working together in communities for the good of the community, but he was very concerned about the dangers of theological dialogue or even theological debate. Um, European and Israeli rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, did not feel that same, didn't share those concerns in the same way. And, we're now 60 years later, even in the American rabbinate, you see increased interest and openness to interreligious, specifically Jewish Christian dialogue.
It's very interesting that there are many different ways and many different approaches throughout the Jewish faith and Jewish scholars. You mentioned a book that was published with and after the Dabru Emet. That
Mhm,
is one of the target groups are youth and young people. What
mhm.
can modern young people, adherents of different covenants with the Almighty, do to ensure that people treat each other the way they would like to be treated?
Um, Well, I mean, that's a tough question. Um, Probably the best thing is to model that kind of behavior. I believe that kindness and respect engender kindness and respect. So, um, uh, uh, the um, when I talk about Jewish Catholic rapprochement, one of the things I think about are uh, photographs, you know, photographs of um, Pope Francis and Rabbi Abraham Skorka together with their arms around one another, or a picture of uh, Pope John Paul II greeting Rabbi Toaf at the synagogue in Rome, and again they're embracing one another. Um, in the idea that these are very powerful pictures, um, and I think that they can teach um, in a way that studying documents can't, right?
Definitely.
So, um, and I bring these up because this is a form of modeling. And if you take that down to the grassroots level or to the local level, when whether it's clergy, rabbis, priests, pastors, imams, or whether it's just lay people getting together, but when you you know when they uh, uh, when they stand together. Um, um, uh, for example, recently, this is obviously you can see what my interests are. When clergy from different traditions stand together to protest what they see as injustices, um, that certainly has an effect on the specific issue that they're addressing. But again, the idea that people are standing together across religious lines to engage in something, a joint action like that, that also has significant impact, I think, um, on the way people think about people from other traditions. So um, modeling behavior um, uh, it seems to me at least as important, if not more important, than um, uh, you know what we might find in text. I don't. I'm a big text person. I have no problem with text. I study text. I occasionally write text even. Um, but and they play a very important role. But equally important, if not more important, is how people behave in the world.
So modeling and showing one another and be open to uh, talk to one another and to engage in dialogue and just be understanding and open to be even friends with one another.
Yes, absolutely. And to
I
show and to show people this is my friend, right? This is my Christian friend. This is my Muslim friend. This is, for people who were thinking, well, Jews and Christians can't be friends. Well, wait, these people are friends. These people are working together. You know, it it uh, it can create a productive cognitive dissonance, I think, and challenge prejudices.
definitely. I have a question, and for context for our viewers, we're recording this interview on March 6th, 2026. Um, there has been there is a big conflict in the Middle East right now, and uh, the Iran's leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, was killed during the attack. Ayatollah is a big religious figure as well as a political figure. Do you think there will be any, or how do you think it will affect the interfaith dialogue or just dialogue between religious communities in the world?
Well, look, when you have a situation in which Israel, which is a Jewish country, attacks Iran, which is a Muslim country, um, that simply by definition is going to create tensions and problems. Um, I think that um, many people viewed um, the positions of um, uh, the current, and regardless of who the specific individual is, there was a great deal of concern and rejection of the policies and the stance of the government of Iran. Um, and its actions and so forth. Um, from Not only from people, from Muslims themselves, right? I mean, there's certainly no unanimity, and I think a lot of people rejected the stance and of that revolutionary government. Um, the one of the problems is that, of course, um, regardless of whether you're talking about Jews or Muslims, if you look at Iran and say that represents all Muslims, if you look at Israel and you say that represents all Jews, um, uh, you're going to have a problem. Um, it's not hard to find examples within the Jewish community of people who hold positions, religious positions, which are equally problematic to those held by the Iranian regime, right? And it's also easy to find people in the Muslim community, both in the Shia community and the Sunni community and beyond, who absolutely reject that ideology. So, um, uh, there is certainly the potential for this conflict to make it more difficult for Jews and Muslims and others to engage in dialogue, and we, saw that clearly in the aftermath of October 7th. I think it goes back to, again, finding common ground with people, acknowledging that, um, uh, you know, violence begets more violence. Um, um, uh, I guess I'm not a complete 100% pacifist. I believe in, you know, in the idea of self-defense. I'm not in any position to judge um, uh, uh, what was the rationale for instigating this most recent round of confrontation. I have no idea where it's going to lead. Um, I'm very concerned that um, uh, I'm very concerned about the potential for sort of endless violence and creating more hatred. Um, uh, if you're being attacked, it's hard to find sympathy for the people who are attacking you. Um, you know, um, uh, uh, Before we started recording here, we talked about the fact that you might have to run to a bomb shelter if the sirens go off, right? And
Indeed.
I was on a Zoom yesterday with a number of colleagues, one of whom is a Palestinian Christian. And in the middle of our conversation, he had to duck out for a few minutes. Um, uh, if anything, I suppose what those of us who believe that uh, dialogue is preferable to violence is that we have to keep at it. We have to have very difficult conversations about what are the motivations? What are the, what do we, where can we be self-critical about either people in our community or teachings in our traditions that can be used or abused to further the kind of strife that we're seeing now. Um, it certainly seems like um, uh, uh, those of us who are committed to dialogue are not the majority, do not have the power. We don't have the Air Force and the Army and all of that. Um, and this is where I like to remind people that in the course of human history, the sort of interreligious dialogue that we're talking about, that you and I are committed to, um, is still a fairly new and a radical idea. Again, the idea that we can use our differences as a way of promoting understanding and building peace and so forth. Um, that's a radical idea. And sometimes it takes time for radical ideas to become mainstream, and we just have to keep at it and not allow those who have power and weapons um, to completely control the conversation. Now, again, I am realistic about the numbers and so forth. Um, but I think that we are making progress in this direction. Slowly, took me a long time, but I think we're making progress.
Definitely. And I also want to wish everyone in the world and also who is tied up with this or anyhow affected by this conflict, this situation in the Middle East, to stay safe and just that there will be peace soon. I would like to ask you one last question. Could you tell us how the ICCJ, the International Council of Christians and Jews, of which you are president, um, what are the projects right now? What are you working on? Um, how?
Sure. Well, first of all, we are, and you'll forgive me if for putting a plug in here, but we are planning our international conference for this summer to be held in Hanover, Germany, beginning July 12th. Our theme is um, repentance, repair, and reconciliation, religious resources for tumultuous times. So we're acknowledging precisely is going on, although we did choose that because the times already seemed tumultuous before this latest round. We're planning the conference. Uh, at our conferences, we are stressing trilateral dialogue and so our plenary sessions will all feature Jewish, Christian, and Muslim speakers. Um, we are in the process of revitalizing our International Abrahamic Forum, which is specifically directed at promoting Jewish, Christian, Muslim trilateral dialogue. We hope to be having some announcements about that coming out shortly. And that will be a significant part of this conference. So I would say that uh, those are the two big things that we're working on right now. We continue to publish our online journal, jcrelations.net, which has articles in French, German, Spanish, English, and Russian, um, and probably Hebrew if I think about it. But getting the word out there. And then I think it's also important to keep in mind that a lot of the work, the kind of interreligious dialogue work that the ICCJ promotes, is done on the ground by our national member organizations. So, um, we have organizations in over 30 countries around the world. Some of them are quite large and active. Some of them are a little smaller. But you know, these and you can find them on our website, such as it is. Um, uh, Again, this is a lot of this, sort of people to people work, sort of one person at a time. Growing this network and expanding the community of those who value this. Um, I like the image of water dripping on a stone. Um, Eventually, the water will wear away the stone. It may take a while, but the more drops of water we can get, the sooner the stone will be worn away. And so I think Arik Einstein talks about that in one of his songs. Otipa, 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 tien aliyam. Well, one drop after another, eventually you have an ocean. So that's kind of my vision here, is that all of us are drops and that we will become an ocean.
I think that is something we should all aim at, and very positive thinking for the world, and a great aim for everyone who agrees and sees themselves as a part of uh, or supporting the interfaith dialogue and dialogue with different communities in general. I want to thank you for your time, the great opportunity to learn from you, and all the work that you are doing with ICCJ and beyond. Um, as we say in Israel, Toda Rabah. Uh, and
Yasha.
and I want to say to our viewers, thank you for watching my channel. Please stay safe. All of your reactions are very welcome on the channel. Um, See you soon on the podcast, Keeping the Faith.
Sounds good. Thank you.